Hi, this is Nima bringing you a Magic Origins video. We're going to be focusing on the anatomy of a booster pack and analysis of the commons in the set to make up for the content this week. Magic Origins is coming out on Friday, and a lot of the content this week has been mostly speculation, first impressions from the pre-release. It's all stuff that's going to be thrown out as soon as we actually get our hands on the set and figure out what we like. So I don't really trust a lot of that speculation or anything. What I do trust is people that have actually tested the set a lot, which is, at this point, the only person I really trust are the Wizards developers, the ones that developed the set. And we can figure out what WotC thought about each of the commons based on where they put it in the booster pack. And I'm going to show you how you can do that. Just as like a little roundup, a little preview. Each booster pack contains one basic land, one rare/mythic rare, 3 uncommons, and 10 commons. And I believe everyone understands that the rares are all printed together on 11 by 11 sheets. The uncommons are also printed together. However, the commons are actually printed separately from each other. Each common is either printed on run A, run B, or run C. And run C is also split into 2 sub-runs, C1 and C2. And where they put the card, which run they put it in, can actually dictate what they thought about the card. For example, just what I found out just right off the bat, A and B seem to be kind of weaker cards, and WotC put very strong cards in C1 and C2, especially in C2. It has the best commons. And they also don't like to put strong commons right next to each other. They don't want to put Unholy Hunger right by Fiery Impulse, because it makes the power level between booster packs way too inconsistent. Whoever opens up those cards right next to each other, and even another strong common next to that as well, would have a pretty big leg up in a draft or sealed event. And I'm going to show you just some research I did, or not really, this is just data. I'm writing down booster packs, a lot of which are from watching MTG Lions booster pack openings. And I'm going to show you right here how a booster pack has 4 cards from run A over here, then 2 cards from run B, and 4 cards from C2. And just show you on this map, I have the A cards. They're always at the beginning of the pack, and there's 2 to 4 of them in each pack, and they're either red, black, or white cards. It's usually hard to separate which cards are in run A and which ones are in run B, but Wizards actually made it pretty easy. All the cards in run A are red, black, or white. All the cards in run B are blue and green. And then C1 and C2 was just a little bit of a puzzle after that, a little bit fun. It's pretty easy to see it just as you're typing it in. You get to see the patterns of which cards are together and which cards you never see together, and that lets you separate which ones are in C1 and C2. And right off the bat, I'm going to mention that I only have about 40 booster packs to work with, so my information is not perfect, it's not complete. And there's also, for example, I never actually found a heavy infantry. I have no idea which print run it's in, because I never saw one opened by me or by MTG Lions, so I'm not sure which print run it's in. And also, sometimes the commons have a little printing error. Sometimes they're out of sequence. For example, I found that there was this sequence over here, Dragon Fodder, Dark Dabbling, Infectious Bloodlust. Threw me for a loop because it didn't really match up with what I thought about what the sequence would be. And it's because it's actually missing a card. It was either discarded or for some other reason removed from the card hopper before they were placed in the booster pack. There's supposed to be here's the sequence up here: Dragon Fodder, Celestial Flare, Dark Dabbling, Infectious Bloodlust. So we can see from here that there's a card that should be here that's missing. And I'm going to talk about so another thing that I found, there's 2 to 4 cards from run B. There's usually 2 to 4 cards at the beginning from run A, and there's usually 2 cards from run B. Sometimes there are 4. Here's an example of a booster pack that had 4 cards from run B, and here's another example, and here's one down here. And then there are cards from C1 or C2, and I found that the pack had C2 cards if and only if there were 4 cards exactly from run A. The maximum number of run A cards were in the booster pack, then there would be cards from C2 in that booster pack. And I believe, just from a huge amount of evidence, that seems to be consistently holding up. Also, for anyone that doesn't know, a foil card replaces a common in the pack, and it will replace either a card from run A or run B, is what I found, is what I'm guessing. And that's how sometimes there are booster packs that only have one card from run A. For example, this one over here. Usually you'd have a minimum of 2 cards from run A. However, the foil in this pack replaced the dragon, or the dragon fodder's little partner, black or white card. So after that, we're going to talk about each run and what I discovered from it. First of all, run A, like I said before, only contains white, black, and red cards. Not only that, it contains them in that exact sequence. Here's like a little, I tried to chain together the sequences I did have. I don't think this is correct, and I wouldn't use this as a reference at all. But for example, I can find like there's a red card, a white card, a black card, red card, white card, black card, red card, white card, black card. And these are taken directly from this sheet over here, not this sheet. Over here, you'll see the same thing, red, white, black, red, red, white, black, red. Just like that, it goes on and on. It seems to be very consistent unless there was a printing error. And the other thing that stood out to me after the colors is that most of the cards in this run are very, very weak. Has some of the worst cards in these colors in this run, and doesn't have any of the cards I consider very strong. And there's actually a very bad sequence in here. Let me see if I can find it. There's Act of Treason, Mighty Leap, and Touch of Moonglove right next to each other. If you open that up in your draft, I feel really bad because those are not very good cards for draft, and those are just like 3 dead cards right next to each other. The ones I did find that were strong for draft were Fetid Imp, a Crone Sergeant, Eye of Light Assassin, Celestial Flare, and Deadbird Shaman. And these are all pretty good playables. I wouldn't call them great. I wouldn't like to play like 3 of them in my deck, for example. But if you were able to deduce that a card from run A was missing during a booster draft, you could reasonably assume it was one of these cards, and you could also probably figure out which color was taken because of the sequence white, black, red, which is also in Uberg order if you want to try to remember it that way. And then moving on to run 2, as I said before, there's always 2 cards from this run each pack, and it's always 1 green card and 1 blue card. Sometimes there are 4 cards from this run, and then it goes green, blue, or blue, green, blue, green. What I mean to say is that they alternate. And these cards were also not extremely strong. It doesn't have any of the very, very strong blue or green cards. I think the strongest one is probably Stratus Walk. And the ones I did point out as notable are Timberpack Wolf, Stratus Walk, Farika's Disciple, Water Courser, and Vastwood Gorger. And none of those cards are extremely great. And there's also some duds in here, such as a Bone to Ash and Maritime Guard. And I'm sure there's like some kind of green one. Like Titanic Growth isn't that great. Oh, Caustic Caterpillar, just not a very good card at all. These are all cards that I wouldn't like to play 3 of in my deck, except for maybe Elvish Visionary. I found that card to be very strong. I thought it's kind of strange that it was in here, but maybe that's an example of Wizards thinking that Elvish Visionary isn't very good in this set. We'll have to find out. And then moving on to Sheet 4, this is where it gets interesting. Sheet 4 still did have a sequence I found in color, which is kind of strange. I found that the sequence went black card, blue card, green card, white card, and then sometimes there would be an artifact or land and then a red card. It was kind of optional whether there was an artifact or land between the white card and the red card. And this run contained much stronger cards than the ones in run A and run B. It still has some of the bad cards as well, but I found that there were cards such as Lightning Javelin and Read the Bones, which are much stronger than all the cards in run A and run B. Also Suppression Bonds. These are fairly strong cards from what people think. Also a Separatist Void Mage is probably the strongest one in this sequence over here. So if you do have a run of C1 cards and you find one missing, you can pretty much easily deduce which one is missing if it comes out of the sequence. If it's one of the end cards in the C1 sequence that was placed in your booster pack, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But if you have like a black card and a green card from run C1, you can make a pretty good assumption that someone took Separatist Void Mage from there, because it is the strongest blue card in the sequence. And I mean, you can automatically assume that someone took a blue card, but also that was probably Separatist Void Mage, or could have been Snapskin Drake is another playable blue card in that. And also the red card that I found very strong is a Europor, Gearcrafter, so also take that into consideration. And then the last sequence is the C2 cards, which contains the strongest cards in the set, the strongest commons by my understanding from limited resources analysis, most people's analysis. These are the strongest cards in the set are found in the C2 cards. And I'm going to look at the other cards in here that aren't right next to the strong cards to find out which ones that Wizards finds are very strong as well. For example, I'm seeing over here that Boggart Brute isn't, oh, it's also next to Unholy Hunger, so maybe it's not that strong. But most of the cards in this set are pretty strong. There's also just some duds like Guardian Automaton, as well as like Alchemist Vial is pretty much okay. But it does contain the best cards, which I've laid out over here. Unholy Hunger, Leaf Gilder, Claustrophobia, Wild Instincts, and Topon Freeblade are all considered one of the strongest cards in their colors. I'm not sure if Topon Freeblade is, leaps and bounds the best white card, but it's considered pretty strong. I think Knight of the Pilgrim's Road is also considered pretty reasonable, but the red card Fiery Impulse is definitely considered the best red card, and Unholy Hunger is also considered the best black card. Claustrophobia, these are very strong removal spells. They're all in the C2 run. So, and the problem is there's not very much to be learned from this because the sequence is completely upturned. It's very hard to put together because a lot of the time there's only 2 cards from run C2 in a booster pack, or 4 cards if you're lucky. And it was very difficult to find out what the sequence was or if there was like any kind of discernible pattern. I found that there were very strong cards around Guardians of Meletis and Deep Sea Terror. They tended to have strong cards next to them. I kind of laid it out a little bit better on here. For example, if I can find a Deep Sea Terror, yeah, it has a Leaf Gilder next to it, and Guardians of Meletis is actually surrounded by Leaf Gilder and Fiery Impulse. Guardians of Meletis with a Leaf Gilder over here. Same thing over here as well. And Guardian of Meletis next to Fiery Impulse and Claustrophobia. And there's a Deep Sea Terror that's next to Leaf Gilder. I'm pretty sure there's a Deep Sea Terror also next to Unholy Hunger over here, and Wild Instincts. So Deep Sea Terror and Guardians of Meletis seems to be flanked by very strong commons. And I'm not really sure what the best red card in this sequence was, which was another thing that threw me for, it's obviously Fiery Impulse, I don't know what I was going to say. For white card, I wasn't sure what the best one was. I'm assuming Wizards identified Topon Freeblade as the best white card. So that's a card that I'm going to consider taking more highly because it's in this sequence, kind of laid out as one of the better cards here, as is Stalwart Aven. This is one that seems to be right next to Mantle of Webs, and if you believe what the sequence says, is that a bad card is always going to be next to a very good card in this sequence. Again, that's not absolutely undisputable, but I will be looking at Stalwart Aven and Topon Freeblade as maybe some underrated cards in this set. I'll have to see how that checks out. And I'm going to bring it back to the top right here. I didn't actually get to put together the complete common print run because I don't really think it's worth it to try to memorize a common print run, and I would definitely advise anyone thinking about it not to do it because there's a lot of things to keep track of in a draft that are more important than trying to figure out what card is missing from your pack or trying to remember the exact sequence of cards. I hope that I give you a couple tips and tricks. Just to review, Run A cards are in the sequence, a WUBRG sequence, white, black, red. And also, the cards in C1 follow this very bizarre bug, then white, red. So I guess if you can remember bug and then Boros, that could help you try to figure out what card is taken from a C1 run. And bring it back around. Also, I think Suppression Bonds was next to Veteran's Sidearm pretty often, and it also followed right after Nissa's Pilgrimage. So I would take that into consideration. If you see a Veteran's Sidearm next to Nissa's Pilgrimage, there's probably Suppression Bonds. It's a little tip or trick that I would give you. And I would try and make a couple tips and tricks like that, just looking at a sequence like this, which I will post online, and try to figure out just a couple easy to remember things. Do not try to memorize the whole order. because I would definitely recommend more when you open up your first booster pack, try to remember which cards are in the pack so that when it wheels back around to you, you can figure out which cards are missing. This is something that I consider much better to devote your brain power to than trying to remember the exact sequence of cards in the common print order. And I think that's going to be it for this video. Please let me know what you think in the comments of whatever Reddit thread I post this in. And yeah, thanks for watching.